Harbor Freight makes a few things that are pretty great for the money, and a lot of stuff that isn't. Their tagline is quality tools at discount prices, but I wish they would be a little more honest, like maybe cheaply made tools that are so cheap they're almost free. Sometimes they are free. What really gets me is when they advertise a comparison. They always pick something way out of their league. Like this end cabinet, they compare it to a snap-on end cab that costs considerably more. Can you compare these two boxes? Well, I owned the Harbor Freight end cab for several years, and I just bought the snap-on. So let's find out. Before we get into the comparison of these two boxes, I'm going to talk about the other toolboxes that I own. Functionally, I'm really only looking for two things in a toolbox. When I stuff 100 pounds of tools in a drawer, will the drawer open and close smoothly? And will it hold up in a workshop environment? This really comes down to build quality, paint, metal, welds, and the quality of the slides. It's weirdly hard to find the right toolbox. It's weird because there are so many of them out there. Several brands, many sizes, all sorts of classifications, anything you could want. But it's hard to know what is better, what actually separates the cheap ones from the expensive ones, and is it worth the price difference? I've spent a lot of time designing cars, so I know what makes a Mercedes cost $140,000, even though you can buy 10 perfectly good Kias for that price. With other products, I sometimes can't figure out where the price difference is coming from. This isn't just true for toolboxes, it's true for everything. This has been really highlighted for me being a new homeowner, like toilets. If you'd asked me a week ago how much a toilet cost, I would have no idea. Maybe somewhere between 80 bucks and several thousand bucks. Turns out it's somewhere between 80 bucks and several thousand bucks. You can spend well past $10,000 on a toilet. And the interesting thing about this is it's not just that there's a few really expensive ones up there, it's just everywhere along the line. Any amount of money you want to spend, there's a toilet for that amount of money. $4,000, $4,000 toilet. $137, you can buy a $137 toilet. The spectrum is entirely covered. However much money you want to take a dump in, you can get a toilet for that. Toolboxes are the same way, but as with most things, there are diminishing returns. You can definitely get 80% of the way there for 20% of the money. I have a lot of toolboxes, probably too many. I have this International over here, this Extreme toolbox. I have 3 Craftsman, 4 actually, if you count this piece of crap here. A Husky, and my newest toolbox, a snap-on end cabinet. I recently replaced the Harbor Freight US General toolbox, this guy with an end cabinet. So we're going to talk about what makes these boxes different and what justifies the cost, or doesn't. The price range on these boxes is pretty wide. The smaller Craftsman was something like 80 bucks. This one that I use as a nightstand was something like $200. I think this guy was 150. The International was 750. The Husky I got on sale for 275, but they're typically 350. The snap-on end cab was only slightly less expensive than all the rest of those combined. This guy, this little guy right here, real expensive. 10 years ago, it was pretty easy to say that this toolbox brand is good and this one is cheap. But a lot of ownership has been mixed up recently, and so much manufacturing has been moved to Asia or Mexico that it's hard to say that this brand is consistently a good value. The International toolbox was an awesome value, but I noticed that at one point the exact same box was being sold as a Husky brand. International has since gone out of business, which is a bummer because this is a great box made in Canada for a great price. A lot of toolbox manufacturers are owned by Stanley Black & Decker. They own, of course, Stanley and Black & Decker, but also DeWalt, Porter Cable, Mac Tools, lots of brands that sell toolboxes, and a few brands that are known for toolboxes like Lista, Vidmar, Proto, and Waterloo. They bought Waterloo a little over 3 years ago. They also bought Craftsman about the same time. There was a time when Craftsman toolboxes were made by Waterloo, but it's not super clear who or where they're being made now. But I have read reports of poor quality control in the newer boxes and a lack of the previously ubiquitous Made in USA stickers. My Craftsmans are all older than the acquisition, so I can't really comment on the new ones. I will say that Craftsman, especially over the last few years, has had a pretty wide range of quality, not necessarily lining up with cost. It's one of those things I wouldn't buy unless you could see the product in person first. Probably a good idea with all toolboxes, but that's not always practical. Side note, toolboxes are the best way to store things. All sorts of things. Tools, of course, but they make the best nightstand. I don't understand why a nightstand has 2 or 3 big drawers. Who's putting big things in a nightstand? It's all small stuff. Get a toolbox. Another great value toolbox is the Husky. I mentioned earlier that the international box was sold under the Husky name, and I'm not sure who's making these boxes now. It could be multiple companies making different Husky boxes, so it's hard to recommend it as a brand. This box, however, is pretty great. It definitely has cheaper slides than the Extreme or International, but it still feels well worth $350. It's also 2 feet deep. Actually, most of my boxes are. I like this a lot better than 18-inch deep you often see. It's a better workspace and has a lot more storage. This one is recommended. Harbor Freight sells a box that's really similar, but it's only 18 inches deep. It's not too much less expensive, but it did feel cheaper. Maybe not significantly, but enough that I would definitely go with the Husky instead, especially considering the extra depth. My mid-range toolbox is this one right here, made by Extreme Tools. Right off the bat, I was reluctant to buy this box because Extreme Tools is kind of a stupid name. Like, it should be filled with vaping supplies and Monster energy drinks. It also has this obnoxious badge on the front. It's plasticky and chrome and ugly and way too big. But people really liked the box. It was reviewed well, and I could easily take the badge off the front, so I got one. The slides are great, the latching mechanism feels amazing, the metal is plenty thick, it has a satisfying latch. You can tell why this one is over $2,000 and the Husky is $350. It's a pretty great toolbox with two small exceptions. One, that ugly badge that I was going to take off, it's attached with a giant two-sided foam sticker. It took me 15 minutes to cut through it with fishing line, and now I have to spend forever carefully peeling off all this rubber bullshit, hoping I don't scratch my box. The other thing that was kind of annoying is that one of the drawers will catch when opening. One side will grab halfway through and it will wiggle and stop opening. I emailed Extreme and said something like, hey, I love the toolbox and I'm not asking for a warranty claim, but I just wondered if you had seen this before and if you knew of a fix. I thought maybe I could swap the slides or something. Anyway, they never responded, just silence, which was kind of annoying. Also, their website looks amateur and dated and doesn't have a ton of data. I'm not sure what's going on behind the scenes, but the toolboxes are pretty great. I did mostly fix the drawer by moving a few things out and rearranging the things left inside. I was below the rated weight, but just barely. I guess it was just an imbalance thing. It still does it on occasion, but I'm not going to worry about it. All things considered, this is my favorite toolbox, and if I need another one in the future, for some reason, I'll probably consider Extreme first. Maybe I can ask them to not put the badge on. Now we get to the Harbor Freight box. I owned one of these boxes until very recently, and it was great. I had the end cab that is an optional add-on, the one that Harbor Freight says is comparable to the Snap-on at over $1,000 less. I know there is some concern with longevity on anything Harbor Freight makes, but this box has held up really well. We had one of these exact boxes in the machine shop at a previous job, and it was used to hold all the collets and turntables, end mills, all the milling equipment. I'm certain it was over the weight limit, and those drawers were open and closed several times a day for years. It worked great. It would be hard to beat this in value for the money. I'm not usually a huge Harbor Freight fan because I like to use tools more than once, but this is probably one thing I would recommend, especially if your budget is in this range. The one thing I will say is that Harbor Freight has maybe not the best quality control, so if you can take it out of the box and check it while you're at the store, that would be ideal. You can tell that it isn't a $1,000 box. The slides are cheaper, they're not nearly as smooth, the drawers don't latch, the metal is thinner, but if you're not using it all day, every day, it's pretty solid. I've worked around a lot of prototyping and manufacturing teams, and it's pretty typical for the average technician to have $5,000 to $10,000 in toolboxes. The quality is definitely higher, but it is, in my opinion, a little bit of a pissing contest. Also, a little bit of how people see you. It's like when some schmuck on Wall Street is wearing a $20,000 watch, it has nothing to do with telling time. It's a lot easier for people to think you're an awesome technician if you don't have a Harbor Freight toolbox. I've always scoffed at the price of Snap-on toolboxes, but always kind of secretly wanted one, though I've never really been able to justify the cost. I know part of the appeal is the truck showing up right at your worksite, and they're made to be used many times a day, every day, for several years. If you've watched my other videos, you know I own a few Snap-on tools. There's not usually a reason to spend that much money on tools unless you work with them for your job, but sometimes I get sick of replacing a tool that I use all the time, or I need a new tool and I just want to know it's good. I call it the nuclear option. Well, I decided that I needed a toolbox in my office, and one of the walls has a pretty useless crawl space behind it, so I'm going to cut a hole in the wall and I'm going to mount the toolbox into the crawl space, flush with the wall. I did this with my two blue toolboxes and it's fucking awesome. Highly recommended if your garage backs up to something useless like a crawl space or the kitchen. If I'm gonna make it a permanent part of the house, I should probably buy a nice one, right? Maybe that's just an excuse so I can buy one, but either way, I got an end cap, which is actually designed to go on the end of another cabinet, but it's perfectly sized to sink into the wall where I want to put it. I got it a few weeks ago and I didn't open it for a while because I have too many projects already and I don't want to get ahead of myself. As you can see, the box followed the rules of the garage, which is that any flat surface will quickly become a workbench. First impressions, well, it comes with free finger smudges on the top, also on the drawers. That's weird. The paint job looks less than perfect, but I'm not too worried about that. The drawers have a stop halfway. It sort of grabs and you have to pull harder to get it all the way open. Is this supposed to be a feature? I don't like it. It's also different on different drawers. It's less pronounced with weight in the drawers, but it's still there. The drawers definitely feel better with some mass inside them. The keys are pretty cool. The rails are not fully secured to the drawers, and the drawer manufacturing doesn't look like anything special. I really don't like that the top drawer is rubbing against the frame of the box. You can see it here already rubbing into the paint. I can't help but wonder what that's going to look like in 5 years. That is not something I would say is acceptable for a box that costs this much. And it makes me wonder what other manufacturing tolerances are this bad. I've used Snap-on boxes at work before and they're nice, but I've never really felt like the price was justified. After owning all of these boxes, I can say for certain that the Snap-on is better quality than most, but I'm not sure that I can say it's better than the Extreme, and certainly not considering that a comparable Snap-on would cost over 3 times as much as I spent on this. Now, I use Toolboxes a lot, and I have for many years, but I've never used them all day, every day for work, so I may not have the refined palate of a toolbox aficionado. I may not be able to detect the je ne sais quoi. I will say that I'm pretty happy with the Snap-on products that I own. Maybe 20 years down the road, the other boxes will be gone and this one will still be around. Who knows? As far as the US General box, I don't think Harbor Freight can honestly argue that their box is comparable. For one, it's smaller. Although if you're gonna sink something into the wall like I am, the Harbor Freight end cap is exactly the width to fit between typical wall stud spacing. I'm not sure that's a selling point. Either way, they certainly have a reasonable argument in saying their box is half as good for 1/6 the price. This is partly because the Harbor Freight box is a good deal for the money, and partly because the Snap-on box is overpriced. But that's Snap-on. It's the nuclear option. Which one should you buy? Well, if you're honestly asking yourself this question, you should almost certainly go with the Harbor Freight box. And at some point in the future, if you decide you really want a Snap-on box, you can upgrade. And then, like me, you can wonder if maybe you should have just bought 6 of the other one. What will I build next? I don't know. I do know, actually, it's right in there. But if you want to find out, hit that subscribe button and follow along. Be sure to like and share and all that other stuff, and I'll see you next time.